The warning reached my desk at 0300 station time. I knew something was wrong before I even opened it. Not because of the security seals. Not because the transmission carried the authority stamp of the Galactic Council itself. Because nobody in the Council used the phrase final notice. Not unless they had already decided what came next. The file was thick. 312 pages. Across the front, written in cold silver text, were the words, "Final Notice of Compliance. Issued to the human delegation by authority of the Galactic Council." I stared at those words for a long moment. Then I sat down slowly. My name is Cale Murrin. For 11 years, I served as humanity's ambassador to the Galactic Council, a political body representing more than 40,000 civilizations spread across known space. In those 11 years, I had negotiated ceasefires, trade corridors, territorial disputes, migration crises, and once spent 6 straight weeks mediating a war that nearly started over mining rights around a dead moon. I had seen angry council sessions before. I had seen threats. I had seen sanctions. But I had never seen this. And the worst part? On the morning that notice arrived, I was the only human within 4 light years. Outside the observation window of the Pathfinder, the conclave station floated silently against the stars. It was enormous. Not a station in the way humans imagine stations. Not a collection of docks and metal corridors. The conclave was the size of a moon. Ringed with glowing communication arrays and rotating habitation sectors, it drifted in slow silence around a nameless star whose light looked amber through the station shields. I had stood at that same window hundreds of times. That morning, for the first time. It felt hostile. I opened the dossier. The Council had listed 17 formal violations committed by humanity over the last 31 standard cycles. Not concerns. Not disputes. Violations. Under Galactic Accord law, that word mattered. It meant enforcement. I started reading carefully. One thing diplomacy teaches you very quickly is this. The fastest way to lose a negotiation is to react emotionally before you understand what the other side is really saying. Violation 1. An authorized settlement inside restricted expansion zones. Humanity had colonized 4 systems the Council considered protected buffer regions. The report described them as unlawful territorial expansion. What it did not mention was that nobody lived there. 2 of those worlds were dying when we arrived. One had a collapsing magnetosphere that would have stripped the planet bare within a century. Human engineers stabilized it in 8 years. The Council's report somehow forgot to include that part. Violation 7. Refusal to surrender propulsion technology under the shared knowledge mandate. That one made me lean back in my chair. Because this was never really about colonies. It was about the F-drive. Humanity had developed a propulsion system capable of reducing interstellar travel times by nearly 90%. The Council wanted complete access to it. We refused. Not because we were greedy. Because we had studied what happened to the last civilizations that handed over major technologies under Council oversight. Every one of them became dependent afterward. Innovation slowed. Approvals became political. Research became regulated. The Council called it cooperation. The affected species quietly called it ownership. Humanity had no intention of making the same mistake. Then I reached Violation 12. The Vega Station Incident. I stopped reading for a while after that. Because technically, they weren't wrong. Years earlier, one of our deep space communication relays accidentally interfered with a Council navigation beacon. A trade convoy had been forced off route for 11 days. Financial losses were significant. The Council documented every credit. What they did not document was that humanity identified the fault within 1 hour, started repairs immediately, and solved the problem in 11 days. The Council's own engineers estimated the repairs would have taken 3 months. We compensated every affected company within 72 hours. But none of that mattered inside the report. Because the report wasn't written to understand us. It was written to build a case. I kept reading. 17 violations. And with every page I realized something slowly. The Council wasn't accusing humanity of aggression. They were accusing humanity of refusing to slow down. At 0700 hours I received a summons to the central chamber. Full session. Mandatory attendance. That alone told me how serious this was. 40,000 civilizations did not gather for routine disciplinary actions. Word had spread. Everybody wanted to watch what happened to the humans. I changed into my formal diplomatic coat, drank the last of my coffee, and walked toward the chamber with absolutely no prepared speech. The council chamber was designed to make individuals feel small. And it succeeded. A massive circular hall stretched beneath a transparent ceiling filled with stars. Tier after tier of delegation platforms surrounded the central floor. Thousands of species occupied the chamber that morning. Some massive. Some microscopic inside atmospheric containment fields. Some biological. Some partially synthetic. Every seat glowing under translation matrices and data feeds. And at the center of all of it, one table. One chair. One human. Mine. I sat down quietly. Then Arkan stood. The Dominari representative towered over most species in the chamber. Dark armored plating covered his upper body like natural battle armor, and his eyes reflected wavelengths humans couldn't even see. Verth had served the Council longer than humanity had possessed spaceflight. When he spoke, the entire chamber listened. The Galactic Council, he said slowly, having reviewed the conduct of the human civilization across 31 standard cycles, and having issued 4 previous notices of concern, each acknowledged and disregarded. The translator paused, then continued. Hereby delivers a final directive. The chamber became completely silent. Verth read the terms one by one. Humanity would surrender administrative control of 14 colonies. Humanity would provide full F-drive documentation within 60 cycles. Humanity would accept permanent military and scientific inspections. And humanity would formally recognize the Galactic Council as the supreme governing authority of regional space. Then came the final condition. Failure to comply within 90 cycles would result in total collective quarantine. Trade termination. Communication blackout. Expulsion from all Council-controlled space lanes. Every civilization would be legally required to sever contact with Earth. No exceptions. When Verth finished speaking, the silence became heavier somehow. I remember looking around the chamber. Not at enemies. At observers. 40,000 civilizations waiting to see how humanity would react. Protocol said I should return to delegation quarters and prepare an official response within 72 hours. So that's exactly what I did. I stood, nodded once, and walked out without saying a single word. Back aboard the Pathfinder, I locked the door to my quarters and sat at the communications terminal for nearly 10 minutes before typing anything. Finally, I sent one message to Earth. Short. Direct. No diplomacy. No emotional language. Just facts. They have issued final notice. 4 conditions. 90 cycles or quarantine. Tell me what to say. Then I sent it. And waited. Deep space communication still took time, even with relay chains. The message would take roughly 3 hours to reach Earth. Another 3 for a response. That left me 66 hours to prepare humanity's answer. I made tea. I stood by the observation window. And I thought about the 11 civilizations that had received final notices before us. I had studied those cases years earlier out of curiosity. Only 2 species complied. The others resisted. None survived intact. Not because the Council destroyed them directly. That was the terrifying part. The Council simply isolated them. Cut trade. Cut communication. Cut movement. And over time, those civilizations slowly collapsed inward under the pressure of being alone. Isolation is patient. Eventually it wins. At least. It always had before. Exactly 6 hours after sending my message, a reply arrived from Earth. Faster than expected. And not from the diplomatic corps. Not from foreign affairs. Not from military command. It came directly from the Secretary General herself, Patricia Aldrin. 3 sentences. That was all. I read them once. Then again. And slowly. The fear I had been carrying since the dossier arrived began to disappear. Not because the situation improved. Because suddenly I understood something I should have understood from the beginning. The Council thought humanity feared isolation. They had completely misunderstood what kind of species we were. I read the message one more time. Then for the first time in 11 days. I smiled. and I began to prepare humanity's response. I spent the next 12 hours inside the Council archives, not reading humanity's file. I already knew what was in it. I was looking for something else. Patterns. If the Galactic Council believed quarantine would force humanity into compliance, then I needed to understand why they were so certain it would work. The archive systems aboard Conclave Station were enormous. Centuries of treaties, wars, economic records, species classifications, expansion disputes,
Intervention historique.
the accumulated memory of 40,000 civilizations. Most diplomats only accessed what they needed. I started reading everything, especially the cases the Council preferred people not talk about. The first thing that surprised me was how long they had been watching us. Humanity officially joined the Council 31 cycles earlier, but observation records showed Council probes had been studying Earth for more than a century before first contact. They had watched us before we reached the Moon, before we built orbital cities, before we understood what waited beyond our own system. The earliest reports classified humanity as a low-level developing species with high internal conflict probability. Standard observation language. Nothing unusual. Then the classifications began changing.
Fast.
By the time humans built our first unstable faster-than-light prototypes, Council analysts had already started flagging us as anomalous. That word appeared again and again throughout the archive. Anomalous development rate. Anomalous adaptability. Anomalous recovery patterns. I leaned back in my chair and kept reading. Every species in the Council's historical database followed predictable developmental curves.
Agriculture.
Industry. Information systems. Spaceflight. Expansion. Stabilization. The timeline varied, but the pattern remained mostly consistent. Humanity did not follow the pattern correctly. Every time the models predicted we would slow down, we accelerated instead. War accelerated us. Disaster accelerated us. Scarcity accelerated us. Even failure accelerated us. One analyst summarized it perfectly in a report written decades earlier. This species responds to pressure by increasing velocity. I read that sentence 3 times. Then I found the line beneath it. Recommend continued observation. Do not interfere. Someone had underlined the final 3 words. Do not interfere. I stared at that for a long moment. Then I kept going. The quarantine cases were harder to locate. The Council avoided the term quarantine in official records. Instead, they used a colder phrase. Administrative Cessation Protocol. I found 14 historical cases. 12 involved civilizations receiving final notices similar to ours. 4 resisted. None recovered. At first glance, the pattern seemed simple. Isolation destroyed them. But the deeper I looked, the less certain I became. Because most of those civilizations had already depended heavily on the Council before sanctions began. Trade dependency. Technology dependency. Resource dependency. The Council didn't defeat them militarily. The Council removed the systems they relied on. And the civilizations collapsed under their own weight. I sat there quietly thinking about Earth. Humanity had trade partners, allies, exchange networks. But dependency? No. Humanity had spent most of its history expecting systems to fail eventually. That changes how a civilization builds itself. I noted every detail carefully. Then, 18 hours before my response deadline, I went somewhere unexpected. The Xenological Research Wing. Most diplomats avoided it. Researchers had a reputation for treating living civilizations like academic puzzles. But I needed perspective from someone outside politics. The research halls were quiet and softly lit, curved white corridors lined with observation displays and historical installations. I found the human exhibit almost immediately. Not large. Not small. Positioned exactly in the middle range of importance. That alone interested me. Then I read the classification panel. Species. Human. Origin. Sol system. 3rd planet. Council membership duration. 31 cycles. Behavioral classification. Unpredictable. Threat ceiling. Unquantifiable. Recommended posture. Containment. I stared at the phrase threat ceiling. Unquantifiable. That was not an insult. Council terminology was precise. Unquantifiable meant analysts had attempted to establish the upper limit of human potential, and failed. They literally could not calculate how dangerous humanity might eventually become. A voice behind me spoke quietly. "You read Valoran translation surprisingly fast for a human." I turned. The speaker was one of the researchers. Tall for his species, pale grey skin, dark reflective eyes. Valoran. A civilization famous for studying other civilizations. He introduced himself as Sen. He had spent 6 years researching humanity. There was no accusation in his voice. Only curiosity. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Mostly I listened. Sen spoke carefully, like someone organizing dangerous thoughts before releasing them. Eventually he said something that changed everything. 3 weeks earlier, the Dominari had proposed a measure against humanity that went far beyond quarantine. He didn't use the actual council term. Apparently there was no direct human translation. But I understood immediately from his tone. It was not economic pressure. It was not diplomatic isolation. It was permanent. The kind of decision civilizations do not recover from. And according to Sen, it had been blocked. 3 senior council elders refused to allow the proposal to reach a full vote. I asked why.
Sen hesitated.
Then answered quietly. They reviewed your historical archive. That confused me at first. Our archive. Yes, he said. All of it. Observation records. Wars. Environmental collapses. Pandemics. Recovery periods. Expansion phases. Everything. And after reviewing human history, the elders refused authorization. What reason did they give? I asked. Sen looked at me for several seconds before answering. Then he spoke slowly. Their statement entered into official record was this. He paused. We have watched the recordings of their history. We will not be the civilization that provokes them. For a moment neither of us spoke. I felt something strange then. Not pride. Not relief. Something colder. Because for the first time, I realized the council might not actually misunderstand humanity at all. They understood us perfectly. And that frightened them. I thanked Sen and returned to the Pathfinder. 30 hours remained before my deadline. I contacted Earth again through a direct secure channel. Patricia Aldrin's aide answered first. I told him what Sen had revealed. There was a long silence. Then the aide asked me to wait. 7 minutes later, the Secretary General herself came onto the line. Her voice was calm as always. I explained everything. The archives. The classifications. The blocked proposal. The elder statement. When I finished, there was silence on the connection for several seconds. Then Patricia said something that made me sit perfectly still. We already know. I frowned. You knew. We've known for 2 weeks, she replied. 2 weeks. Earth had known the Council considered humanity dangerous enough for extermination-level discussion. And nobody panicked. Nobody mobilized fleets. Nobody issued threats. Nobody demanded retaliation. Instead, they sent me 3 calm sentences. Then Patricia spoke again. Keep going, Ambassador. And the line disconnected. I sat there for a very long time afterward, trying to process what that meant. Earth knew exactly how serious the situation was. And Earth's response had not been fear. It had been certainty. Eventually, I stopped trying to understand it emotionally and focused on the work instead. Because suddenly, I understood what my response needed to be. Not anger. Not threats. Not pleading. Truth. Simple truth spoken clearly. I spent the rest of the night building the speech. Not really a speech. More like a statement of record. By morning, I had printed the entire document onto actual paper. Old habit. Digital text feels temporary. Paper feels deliberate. I read the pages carefully while the station's artificial dawn glowed beyond the observation windows. Then I changed into my formal coat, picked up the papers, and walked back toward the chamber. The full session was already assembled. Every level occupied. Thousands of observation feeds glowing blue across the upper walls. The entire galaxy waiting to hear humanity's answer. I stepped onto the central platform slowly. Set the prepared diplomatic draft onto the podium. looked at it for a second, then pushed it aside. Instead, I unfolded the printed pages in my hands. The chamber became completely silent, and I began speaking. The Council dossier lists 17 violations committed by humanity, I said calmly. I am not here to deny any of them. A ripple moved through the chamber. I continued. I am here to explain why every single one happened.
No interruptions.
No movement. Nothing except 40,000 civilizations listening. I started with the colonies. I explained that the systems humanity settled had been abandoned for centuries. I explained the dying worlds we repaired, the notifications we submitted, the council delays, the bureaucratic failures hidden behind the accusation of unlawful expansion, then the F-drive. I read the exact language of the shared knowledge mandate aloud, especially the ownership clauses. Then I listed the civilizations that surrendered major technologies under council management and lost control over future development afterward. We declined because we studied precedent, I said, not because we reject cooperation. The chamber remained silent. Then Vega Station. I walked through the entire timeline minute by minute. Error discovered. Repairs started. Systems restored. Compensation issued. We are sorry the disruption occurred, I said evenly. We are not sorry that we solved the problem faster than anyone believed possible. That line changed the room. I could feel it. Because suddenly the council was no longer listening to a species defending itself. They were listening to a species describing itself honestly. And those are very different things. One by one, I addressed every violation the same way.
No emotional manipulation. No denial.
Only context. Only truth. And slowly, the atmosphere inside the chamber began to shift. Not toward agreement. Toward uncertainty. Because the council had expected humanity to argue emotionally. Instead, we were calmly explaining why we made every decision we made. And worse, the explanations made sense. By the time I reached the end of the 17th violation, the chamber no longer felt hostile. It felt unsettled. Then I turned the page, and finally addressed the thing nobody in that room truly wanted to discuss. Quarantine that I looked up slowly from the paper in my hands. The Galactic Council, I said, has issued collective quarantine measures 14 times in the last 2,000 cycles. The chamber remained completely silent. I reviewed every case. Several delegates shifted slightly at that. Most of them probably assumed a human ambassador would spend the 72-hour response period preparing emotional arguments or political counteroffers. Instead, I had done homework. In 12 of those 14 cases, I continued, the targeted civilization received a final notice nearly identical to the one humanity received 4 days ago. I paused. 4 resisted. No movement anywhere in the chamber. All 4 civilizations disappeared. That landed heavily. Not because the information was secret. Because nobody ever said it aloud. Especially not in the council chamber. I folded one page carefully and continued. The council's official position is that quarantine is corrective rather than destructive. Isolation creates pressure. Pressure creates compliance. Compliance restores order. I nodded slightly. That logic is sound. Historically speaking, it works. I let the silence sit there for a moment. Then I said the sentence that changed the room. But humanity has a problem. Now I had their full attention. We do not respond to pressure correctly. The translation systems hesitated slightly on the word correctly. Then continued. I walked slowly across the platform. Our historical archive is available in your systems. Many of you have reviewed it yourselves. Some of you have studied us for more than a century. I looked toward the upper tiers. You already know this, even if you have never said it directly. I unfolded the next page. Human civilization has faced extinction-level events 7 documented times in our recorded history. I began listing them. Planetary wars, economic collapses, global environmental disasters, pandemics, resource failures, political fragmentation. Each one severe enough that another species might not have recovered. Each time, I said calmly, we lost millions. I paused. Sometimes more. The chamber was motionless now. But every single time. I looked directly at Arkenverth. We came back stronger than before.
No emotion. No anger.
Just fact. That is not national mythology. It is not propaganda. It is an observable historical pattern. I took another step. When pressure is applied to humanity, we adapt. Another step. When resources become limited, we innovate. Another. When conditions worsen, we accelerate. Now even the translation systems sounded quieter somehow. This is not because we are fearless, I said. It is because our civilization never learned how to stop moving forward. I could feel it now. The chamber wasn't resisting anymore. It was listening. Really listening. I unfolded the final page slowly. The Secretary General of Earth asked me to deliver humanity's formal response exactly as written. I looked down at the paper. Then read the 3 sentences that had changed everything for me. We have been here before. The chamber stayed perfectly still. We have always found a way forward. A few delegates lowered their translation feeds. And then the final sentence. We are not asking permission to continue doing so. Silence. Absolute silence. I folded the paper carefully. Then I added something that wasn't in the official statement. My personal assessment, I said quietly. I looked directly at Verth again. A quarantine only succeeds when the civilization being quarantined is psychologically capable of becoming smaller over time. No movement anywhere. We are not. The words sounded almost gentle. We have tried throughout our history to slow ourselves, to stabilize permanently, to remain satisfied with limits. I shook my head slightly. It never lasts. I let the truth settle into the chamber. This is not defiance. I looked around slowly at all 40,000 civilizations. It is description. I picked up my papers. We are prepared to negotiate every issue listed in the dossier. Another pause. But humanity cannot sign an agreement promising to stop being what it is. Then I stepped away from the podium. And the chamber remained silent. 11 seconds. I counted them without meaning to. Then suddenly the translation systems reactivated all at once. Thousands of simultaneous interpretations flooded the chamber. Voices. Signals. Private channels. Data streams. 40,000 civilizations trying to process the same realization simultaneously. I walked back to my seat calmly. Sat down. And waited. 3 days passed. No response.
No summons. No formal acknowledgement.
Nothing. That terrified me more than open hostility would have. The council was procedural to its core. It documented everything. Even minor diplomatic exchanges generated official confirmations. But now, silence. Total silence. Which meant something serious was happening behind closed doors. On the 4th day, Earth's intelligence relay sent me the first meaningful report. 3 Dominari battle fleets had repositioned. Not toward human territory. Away from it. I read the report twice. Then a 3rd time. The fleets had withdrawn from staging sectors near human colonies and redeployed around Dominari core worlds instead.
Défensive formation.
That mattered. Military posture tells you how a civilization thinks. An offensive posture faces outward. A defensive posture protects inward. The Dominari were no longer preparing to pressure humanity. They were preparing to protect themselves from unknown outcomes. That realization sat heavily in my chest. A few hours later, Sen visited the Pathfinder unexpectedly. He looked exhausted. Not physically. Mentally. Like someone whose understanding of reality had shifted faster than they could process. We sat together in one of the smaller meeting rooms aboard the ship. 2 untouched cups of tea sat between us. Finally he spoke. I need to tell you something unofficial. I nodded. The proposal against humanity, he said carefully. The one I mentioned before. I waited. I did not tell you the full elder statement. That got my attention immediately. Sen reached into his bag and removed a small data card. He stared at it for several seconds before continuing. The 3 elders submitted a joint recommendation after reviewing humanity's complete observational archive. He inhaled slowly. Part of their statement was omitted from public record circulation. Then he began reading. After reviewing 112 years of direct observation, we conclude that humanity does not respond to suppression according to known civilizational behavior models. My stomach tightened slightly. Sen continued. Every intervention scenario we applied produced the same result. External pressure accelerated human development rather than limiting it. I leaned back slowly. He kept reading. No historical evidence exists supporting the assumption that humanity can be permanently diminished through isolation, scarcity, or threat projection. Then came the final line. The line that explained everything. We believe any attempt to permanently restrict this species would eventually produce a version of humanity no longer interested in coexistence. The room became very quiet after that. I looked down at the cold tea in front of me. Finally, I asked the obvious question. What happens now? Sen was silent for a long moment. Then he answered honestly. The Council is trying to understand what humanity actually is. I frowned slightly. We are a civilization. No, Sen said quietly. You are something more difficult than that. He leaned forward slightly. The Council understands empires, expansion powers, militarized states, economic coalitions. We understand species that seek dominance. He paused. But humanity behaves differently. I waited. You expand because movement itself appears natural to you. That sentence stayed with me. Sen continued carefully. Your species does not pursue survival the way other civilizations do. Most civilizations seek stability eventually. Predictability. Balance. He looked directly at me. Humans appear to become uncomfortable when conditions stop changing. I almost laughed. Because he wasn't wrong. Our analysts cannot model that correctly, he admitted. Because your species keeps reinventing itself faster than projections update. He stood slowly. Then stopped near the doorway. There is a closed council session happening right now, he said quietly. Do you know the subject? Sen nodded. Then gave a tired smile. The question under discussion is this. He looked directly at me. How do you build a relationship with a civilization you cannot contain, cannot predict, and cannot outgrow? Then he left. I sat there alone for a very long time afterward. Not feeling victorious. That's important. This wasn't victory. Nobody had won anything. The Council wasn't evil. Humanity wasn't superior. This was something stranger. An ancient institution had encountered something it genuinely did not know how to classify. And that frightened everyone involved. That evening, another message arrived. Directly from Arkenvertha's private office. That alone was unusual. The Dominari almost never communicated privately. Especially not with humans. The message contained only 4 words. Written in English. Perfect English. A language Verth had never publicly used before. No translation matrix attached.
No diplomatic formatting.
Just 4 simple words. We understand you now. I stared at the message for a very long time. Then I stood at the Pathfinder observation window and looked out at Conclave Station glowing silently against the stars. Somewhere inside that massive structure, 40,000 civilizations were rethinking assumptions they had carried for thousands of years. And back on Earth, humanity was already moving forward. Later that evening, Secretary General Patricia Aldrin delivered a public announcement. She never mentioned the Council. Never mentioned the final notice. Never referenced the chamber session. Instead, she calmly announced that 3 new deep space colony fleets had been approved for launch. Standard expansion operations. New worlds. New settlements. New routes. The timing wasn't a threat. That's what made it powerful. Earth wasn't reacting emotionally. Humanity was simply continuing. As if movement itself was inevitable. As if no external pressure in the galaxy could truly convince us to stop building the next ship. And somewhere inside the Council's closed chambers, ancient civilizations were beginning to understand what that really meant. 6 months later, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee while the Galactic Council argued about water rights. And honestly, it was one of the happiest mornings of my life. Rain tapped softly against the windows of my house in Norwich, while sunlight pushed through the clouds in thin grey beams. The kitchen smelled like toasted bread and old coffee grounds. Normal things. Human things. After 11 years aboard stations and diplomatic ships, I had forgotten how peaceful ordinary life could feel. My resignation from the diplomatic corps had gone through 3 weeks after returning from Conclave Station.
No ceremony. No speeches. No dramatic farewell.
Which suited me perfectly. Humanity already had my replacement ready before I submitted the paperwork. Amara Osai, 29 years old. Linguist. Specialist in interspecies communication theory. Fluent in 14 languages and currently learning a 15th because apparently that still wasn't enough for her. I had met her during the transition briefing. 3 hours of reports, protocols, archived disputes, council histories, and procedural warnings. She listened quietly the entire time. At the end, she asked exactly 3 questions. All 3 proved she already understood the situation better than most senior diplomats ever would. I remember driving home afterward feeling something unexpected. Relief. Not relief from escaping responsibility. Relief from knowing the work would continue in capable hands. Now her voice played softly through the broadcast feed mounted in my living room. She was currently negotiating hydrological survey access with 4 council species operating near humanity's newest colonial sectors. Water agreements. Environmental compatibility. Trade mapping. Careful, practical diplomacy. The kind that never becomes famous but quietly determines whether future colonies survive. I leaned against the kitchen counter listening to her speak. Calm. Precise. Patient. Better than I ever was. And the strange thing was, that realization didn't bother me at all. Because humanity had never really been about individuals. That was the thing the Council had struggled to understand from the beginning. Humans do not move forward because one generation becomes extraordinary. We move forward because every generation leaves instructions for the next one. Mistakes become lessons. Lessons become systems. Systems become foundations. And then somebody younger builds something better on top of them. The failures I made during my early diplomatic years, Amara would never need to repeat them. Not because she was perfect. Because humanity learns collectively. That matters. A lot. The Council studied us as individuals for decades. Human psychology. Human aggression. Human adaptability. Human emotional behavior. But studying individual humans is not the same as understanding humanity itself. Because when several billion humans work across multiple generations towards something larger than themselves, the result becomes difficult to predict. Even for us. I poured another cup of coffee while Amara shifted the discussion toward atmospheric compatibility agreements. 3 council scientific bodies had already offered support for the new colonies. She accepted gracefully while preserving complete human operational independence. A delicate balance. And she handled it naturally. I smiled quietly. She probably didn't even realize how skilled she already was. Outside the kitchen window, my daughter Clara sat in the garden doing schoolwork beneath the old oak tree near the stone wall. She was 12, and completely unimpressed by my diplomatic history, which I secretly loved. To her, I wasn't the ambassador who stood before 40,000 civilizations during the largest political crisis in human history. I was just her father, the man who forgot where he left his reading glasses twice a week. The final notice technically still existed inside council archives. That part surprised a lot of people later. It was never formally withdrawn. Never cancelled. Never resolved. It simply stopped moving. Like an old storm warning nobody believed mattered anymore. No quarantine happened. No enforcement fleets arrived. Human colonies remained active. Trade routes slowly reopened. Conversations continued. Carefully. Quietly. Humanity still controlled the F drive. Though Amara had already begun negotiating a modified technology sharing framework with limited scientific access provisions. Progress was slow, but real. The Dominari fleets remained stationed around their own core systems. Defensive posture unchanged. At first many humans interpreted that as hostility. I didn't. I understood what it actually meant. Caution. The Council still didn't fully know what humanity might become. And ancient civilizations tend to react cautiously to uncertainty. Honestly, that was reasonable. What interested me more were the smaller changes happening at the edges of council space. 2 older member species quietly opened direct trade applications with human colonies. The Siri and the Law. Neither species had significant political influence. Both had remained mostly invisible inside council affairs for centuries. But now they were moving first. That mattered too. The Siri operated ancient twin worlds with infrastructure older than some civilizations. Quiet people. Careful thinkers. They arrived at one of humanity's outer colony hubs carrying industrial materials Earth needed badly. In exchange, humanity provided agricultural systems the Siri had never developed themselves. The entire exchange took 11 days. Both sides described it as highly successful. The Law moved even faster. They specialized in precision scientific instruments used throughout known space. Instead of going through council channels, they contacted Earth directly. Patricia Aldrin responded within 24 hours. Negotiations began immediately. The council observed all of this carefully. And for the first time in centuries, it chose not to interfere. Sen later described this to me perfectly during one of our occasional encrypted messages. The council is breathing slowly around humanity, he wrote. I thought about that line for days afterward. Because it was true. Ancient institutions were trying very hard not to react impulsively to something they did not fully understand. That takes wisdom. More wisdom than most people realize. After breakfast, I carried my coffee outside. Clara looked up briefly from her homework. You're listening to the council again, she said. Not a question. Children notice patterns frighteningly fast. A little, I admitted. She narrowed her eyes slightly. Are they still scared of us? The question caught me off guard. Months earlier she had asked me something similar after I returned home from Conclave Station. At the time I answered honestly. Yes. Now though, the answer felt more complicated. I sat down on the back steps quietly. I think, I said carefully, they're trying to understand us. Clara considered that seriously. Didn't they already study us? Yes. Then why don't they understand? I smiled faintly. Because honestly, that was a very human question. Studying something isn't always the same as understanding it, I said. She accepted that immediately and returned to her homework. I looked up at the sky. Blue. Calm. Empty from this distance. Somewhere beyond that sky, beyond Earth orbit and the cold dark between systems, 40,000 civilizations were slowly adjusting themselves around a new reality. Not because humanity threatened them. Because humanity changed the assumptions their systems were built on. For thousands of years, the Council believed every civilization eventually stabilized into predictable patterns. Humanity didn't. That single fact disrupted centuries of political philosophy. The strange part? We never intended to disrupt anything. We were simply continuing to do what humans always did. Move forward. Build the next thing. Solve the next problem. Recover from the next disaster. The Secretary General's 3 sentences still sat folded inside my desk drawer upstairs. I never framed them. Never displayed them publicly. They weren't inspirational words. They were observations. Simple truths humanity already knew about itself. People asked me many times after returning home what it felt like standing in that chamber delivering our response. Most expected dramatic answers. Courage. Defiance. Fear. But the truth was simpler than that. It felt like reading a historical document aloud. Like stating facts everyone already knew but nobody wanted spoken clearly. That was all. Truth delivered without performance. And somehow, that had changed everything. Later that afternoon, Sen sent another encrypted message through his private research channel. Short. Direct. Very unlike him. There is an internal council memo circulating among senior members. Subject line attached below. I opened the file. Only one sentence appeared. What do we do if they keep improving? I stared at the screen for a very long time. Not because the question frightened me. Because of what it revealed. The council no longer viewed humanity as a temporary problem. It was beginning to understand we were permanent. Not unstoppable. Not invincible. Permanent. A civilization still climbing. Still changing. Still becoming something new faster than prediction models could update. And somewhere inside the oldest political institution in known space, ancient minds were realizing humanity might never truly stop growing. The strange thing was, humans already knew that. We always had. Because every generation inherits unfinished work from the one before it. And somewhere ahead of us, beyond every star we had reached so far, there would always be another horizon waiting. Humanity had never been very good at ignoring horizons. I looked out across the garden. Clara had fallen asleep in the grass beside her school books. The afternoon sunlight touched the edges of the oak tree while wind moved softly through the leaves. Peaceful, quiet, ordinary. And somewhere across the stars, entire civilizations were trying to understand how a species capable of standing calmly in moments like this could also become something impossible to contain when challenged. Honestly, I wasn't completely sure myself. Maybe nobody ever would be. A year after the final notice, the Galactic Council invited humanity to lead a joint exploration initiative beyond map space. Nobody said the words publicly, but everyone understood what it meant. The Council had stopped trying to contain us. Now it was trying to keep up. The proposal arrived through standard diplomatic channels while I was repairing a broken fence behind my house. I remember because Clara walked outside holding the tablet with a look of absolute disbelief on her face. "You're not going to believe this," she said. I took the tablet from her carefully. The message header carried the full seal of the Galactic Council. Beneath it was a simple request. Human participation requested for Outer Verge Survey Initiative. I read it twice, then a third time, and slowly started laughing. Not because it was funny, because it was impossible. 1 year earlier, the Council had debated whether humanity represented a structural threat to galactic stability. Now they wanted us leading expansion missions into unexplored space. Clara frowned at me. "Is that good?" I thought about it honestly, then nodded. "Yes," I said quietly. "I think it is." The Outer Verge sat beyond established Council routes, past the regions most civilizations considered practical for expansion. Unstable stars, poor navigation conditions, long-range supply problems. Too unpredictable, too expensive, too dangerous. Which meant, naturally, humanity was immediately interested. That was another thing the Council had finally started understanding. Humans hear warnings differently than most species. When another civilization hears impossible, they usually think stop. Humans tend to hear try anyway. The official explanation for the initiative was scientific cooperation, shared mapping operations, joint research opportunities, mutual expansion frameworks. All technically true. But Sen later sent me the private Council summary. The real reason was written in one sentence. If humanity is going to continue accelerating, it is strategically wiser to move beside them than stand in front of them. I read that line several times. Not because it sounded threatening, because it sounded honest. The Council had finally accepted something fundamental. Humanity was not a temporary political problem. We were part of the future now. And the smartest minds in the galaxy had decided adaptation was better than resistance. That realization changed everything. Trade with human colonies expanded rapidly after the initiative announcement. Species that had spent decades cautiously avoiding us suddenly became interested in partnerships. Not because they trusted us completely. Trust takes time. Because they realized humanity was going to keep moving outward regardless. And civilizations prefer relationships with growing powers rather than isolation from them. The Siri established permanent agricultural exchanges with 3 human frontier systems. The law opened joint research facilities near Mars orbit. Several smaller Council species began sending students to Earth universities. That last one surprised me most. Not the students themselves. The subjects they wanted to study. Human history. Human engineering. Human disaster recovery systems. One Valoran research paper became especially famous inside academic circles. Written jointly by Sen and 6 other xenological analysts. The paper's title spread through Council networks faster than almost any political document in recent memory. Humanity and the Persistence Instinct. I eventually received a copy. Most of it was highly technical. Behavioral projections. Historical modeling failures. Civilizational adaptation analysis. But one paragraph stayed with me. The paper argued that humanity's greatest strength was not intelligence, aggression, or technological growth. It was psychological continuity. The simple refusal to accept endings as permanent. The researchers concluded this trait appeared so deeply rooted in human civilization that external suppression often reinforced it rather than weakening it. In other words, the harder conditions became, the more determined humans grew. Again, none of this sounded dramatic to me, because humans already knew. We lived this way long before we reached the stars. The Council was simply discovering it for the first time. One evening Sen visited Earth personally. Officially for research exchange discussions. Unofficially, I think he just wanted to see humanity outside observation reports. I pick him up from the transport station outside London. During the drive back to Norwich, he spent most of the time staring silently out the window. At one point, we passed a football field where children played in heavy rain while parents shouted encouragement from the sidelines. Sen watched them carefully. Finally, he asked something quietly. Why are they still playing? I glanced at the field. Because the game isn't finished. No, he said slowly. The weather conditions are terrible. I laughed. That's normal here. He kept watching. They appear happy. They are. He looked genuinely confused by that. Later that night, after dinner, Clara asked him the same question she once asked me. Are council species still scared of humans? Sen considered the question seriously. Then answered with complete honesty. Yes. Clara blinked. Why? Sen looked toward the window for a moment before answering. Because your species treats difficulty differently than ours do. He spoke carefully. Most civilizations seek stability after surviving hardship. Humanity appears to seek new hardship once stability arrives. Clara thought about that. Then nodded slowly like it made perfect sense. Honestly? To humans, maybe it did. A few months later Amara Osai delivered what historians would later call the Norwich Address. Not because it happened in Norwich. Because she quoted something I once said there privately during an interview. The council chamber was full again when she spoke. Thousands of civilizations listening. But this time the atmosphere was different.
No hostility.
No fear. Careful curiosity. Amara stood calmly at the central platform and said something that would eventually spread across half the galaxy. Humanity does not wish to rule the stars, she said. We wish to reach them. Simple sentence. Massive difference. Then she continued. If we build quickly, it is because there is still more to build. If we expand, it is because there are still places waiting to become homes. If we continue moving forward, it is because stopping has never been the purpose of being alive. Sen later told me the chamber remained silent for 9 full seconds after she finished. Not shock silence. Thinking silence. The kind that happens when an idea settles deeply. The council never formally apologized for the final notice. Ancient institutions rarely apologize directly. Instead, they changed procedures. Quietly. Slowly. A new classification framework appeared inside council law 2 years later. Adaptive civilizations. Only one species occupied the category. Humanity. The official description read, civilizations demonstrating persistent growth under external pressure conditions and historically resistant to long-term containment modeling. Beneath that classification sat a recommendation written by unanimous council vote. Preferred diplomatic posture. Cooperative engagement. When I first read that line, I sat quietly for several minutes. Then I folded the report and placed it back in the drawer beside Patricia Aldrin's 3 sentences. Outside my window, the evening sky darkened slowly over Norwich. Ships moved silently across the upper atmosphere far above the clouds, carrying people toward colonies that did not even exist when the Council issued its final warning. Humanity kept building. The Council kept adapting. And somewhere far beyond map space, exploration fleets were already preparing routes toward stars nobody had reached yet. The thing most people misunderstand about that period is this. Humanity did not win because we were stronger. The Council did not step back because it was weak. Nobody surrendered. Nobody conquered anyone. Something far more important happened. 2 very different civilizations looked at each other honestly for the first time. And honesty changed the future. Years later, Long after historians turned the final notice crisis into books and documentaries and political theory studies, Clara asked me something while helping clean the attic. We found the old printed copy of Patricia Aldrin's message folded inside one of my archive boxes. She read the 3 sentences quietly, then looked at me. "Did you know back then?" she asked. "Know what?" "That humanity would be okay." I thought about the question carefully, then smiled. "No," I admitted. "I only knew humanity would keep going." She considered that for a moment. Then she smiled too. Outside the attic window, the night sky stretched endlessly above the city. Cold stars. Distant worlds. Infinite unfinished work waiting somewhere ahead. And humanity. Humanity was already on its way there. Because we always were.